Welcome to the Bill of Rights in Action. I'm Robin Robinson. Today's program is part of WABA TV's continuing series on how the community of Middleburg is responding to contemporary constitutional issues. This time, let's look at the implications of drug testing. This story began with Mayor Krug's recent introduction of a random drug testing ordinance for all Middleburg City employees as a condition of their employment. The mayor stated that the proposed ordinance would curb city employee use of drugs and alcohol and improve public safety. Opponents claim that such a testing program violates the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment protects individuals against unreasonable search and seizure. That is, a search where there is not clear evidence of wrongdoing. In determining this issue, the community must weigh the public's safety against the privacy rights of city employees. For the specifics of Mayor Krug's proposed ordinance, we now bring you coverage of the meeting.
The June 9, 1989 meeting of the Middleburg City Council will please come to order. I think that we will now move to the first item on the agenda, and that is the proposed ordinance entitled the Employee Safety Ordinance. Now, as you know, some big city problems have infiltrated our small community. We're only 75,000 people. And in the past, we read about these problems as happening in Chicago and New York and Los Angeles, and suddenly they are on our doorstep also. Last year, our police department saw the number of drug arrests in the city climb to 227, which was more than double the number of arrests last year, and this is for the crimes involving drugs. We cannot ignore the fact that the use of illegal drugs and alcohol is as much a problem in Middleburg as it is in any city in this nation. On the home front, the drug industry is rumored to have fostered corruption among our very own Middleburg police force. I believe that the time has come to deal with this problem before it becomes rampant and any more widespread. And that is why I am introducing this ordinance, which calls for random, periodic testing of all city employees as a condition of their employment. Of particular concern are those employees who are responsible for public safety. I'm referring here, of course, to the police force, our firefighters, and our city bus drivers. But in the interest of fairness, I am fair, I am proposing that we apply this requirement to all city employees. What I propose is that the first time an individual tests positive for a controlled substance which has not been prescribed by a physician, or he tests positive for blood alcohol content in excess of 10%, a written warning will be made a part of that person's permanent employee file, and the individual will be referred to an approved drug or alcohol abuse treatment program. Upon testing positive for the second time, however, the said employee will be immediately suspended without pay and terminated according to standard due process procedures. There is even a procedure in my proposed ordinance for an appeal process. And I think that you will all agree that this is a sound ordinance, and I ask for and encourage your support for it.
Drug tested by the workers! Drug tested by the workers! Drug tested by the workers! Drug tested by the workers!
I was just about to ask for any community comments. You certainly jumped the gun. I would be very happy to hear a statement, all right, to hear statements.
Point of order,
Yes.
Mayor.
Yes.
Does this ordinance apply to elected city officials? Will the city council and the mayor also be required to undergo drug testing?
According to my ordinance, we will not be. This is for employed.
Drug test degrade the workers. 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 Drug test.
Well, it's obvious that there are a lot of people here that want to say something. I'll second this proposed ordinance to put it on the floor for discussion.
Thank you very much.
Mayor?
Chip, do you want to say something?
Yes, Mayor. As you know, and this demonstration just confirms my concerns about this ordinance.
Councilmember Pitts, whose liberal views have been well publicized, questioned whether the drug testing ordinance was constitutional and warranted.
Particularly concerned that the ordinance as written has some constitutional problems. If I can just call your attention to a couple of questions I have, maybe you can answer them for me. I'm wondering what exactly we're trying to achieve in this ordinance, what our legitimate end is. I think that as a result of our drug education efforts here locally and the fact that our arrests are double what they are last year, that we have been doing pretty well. And I think the workers' demonstration here indicates that it may be unfair and going too far to include all city employees within the random testing process.
You certainly have raised many questions. Now, let me start and try to answer at least a few of them, and I suspect that during the course of our discussion, many more answers will come out, and perhaps additional questions will be raised. First of all, yes, I have drafted and introduced this ordinance, but it was not cut out of whole cloth. I have responded to substantial requests, or a substantial number of requests, I should say, from the citizens of this community. They are concerned about the use of drugs. Yes, there is a rumor about the police department, and yet Judge Fishbach himself has agreed that possibly as many as 10 of his officers are involved in some way with drugs. It has not been proven yet, and I know this, but that does give us some probable cause. I believe, in
Someone here
fact,
from the police department for us to hear
is
from?
Judge Fishbach here? Chief, what did I call him, Judge? Chief, I'm sorry.
Mayor
Ye-
Krug,
Yes,
I am Detective Ann Levinson, Middleburg Police Force. Police Chief Fishbach was called away on an emergency and ordered me, asked me to come here today and read the statement that Fishbach had prepared and would have read had he been here. So with that in mind, I will read the statement prepared by Police Chief Fishbach. We do have some concrete evidence that up to a dozen officers have been using illegal drugs which they have received from the mob. Because those officers are currently under investigation, I cannot say anything further at this time, but I do acknowledge that we have a problem on the force. I support the proposed ordinance because I want to help the officers before they fall in the line of duty. I believe this ordinance will force those who are now addicts to voluntarily get clean and get treatment before they fail that first drug test or before they are involved in a tragedy while on duty.
Detective Levinson's personal statement on the issue shocked the crowd.
Mayor Krug, if I may take a moment, I would like to speak as an individual police officer and am a member of the narcotics force of the Middleburg Police Force.
certainly, Detective Levinson, please proceed.
I have been on the Middleburg Police Force for 7 years, Mayor Krug, and in that entire time I have been on the narcotics unit. I take the proposal of this ordinance personally. I take this as a personal affront to the narcotics officers on the force of the Middleburg Police Force. I take the allegations made by our own police chief as unfounded. I have seen no facts to support those allegations. And I'm telling you, take this personally, and I'm going to tell you right here, right now, I'm going to stand up for myself, and I'm going to say, if this ordinance passes, I'm turning in my badge.
Detective Levinson?
The council looked to the private sector for input on the proposed ordinance.
I understand that George Buckley, the president of the Allied Industries of Middleburg, has requested time to speak. Mr. Buckley.
Thank you, Mayor Krug. Members of the council, I bring greetings to you and to the entire council on behalf of AIM, the Allied Industries of Middleburg. Over the last 5 years since the founding of our organization, we have been proud to consult with the council about many different management issues. I think we all agree that the city has been operating more efficiently and cost-effectively as a result of this cooperation. City government can learn a lot from business and industry. 30% of the major companies in the country implemented a drug testing program prior to October 1986, and all of AIM's affiliates have implemented drug testing programs over the last 3 years. I am here today to report to you on what our experience has been. But before I get into those details, I'd like to say a few words about the problem. In evaluating this proposal, you must understand that drug users go through 3 distinct phases: the acute phase, the carryover phase, and the chronic phase. This is the case with all substance abusers, including those who use cocaine and marijuana, as well as users of alcohol. It is easy to identify a person who is in the acute phase. All of us know how a person behaves while under the influence of alcohol, for example. A random testing program, however, is designed to identify users in the carryover phase, where the symptoms are not so apparent. In this second phase, individuals who use marijuana typically have problems in areas such as depth perception long after the obvious effects of the drug have worn off. In the case of alcohol users, the carryover phase is commonly known as the hungover phase, where an individual's motivation, alertness, and performance are all affected. During the advanced or chronic phase, there may be significant and long-term damage to the body, including weight loss, inability to sleep, increased heart failure, and perforation of nasal membranes for cocaine addicts. Marijuana can affect the lungs, short-term memory, and the immune system. And alcoholics typically have liver problems and may also suffer from malnutrition. We hope to prevent employees from reaching this chronic stage. One must conclude from this brief overview that the use of alcohol and drugs adversely affects employee safety and job performance in a number of ways. To measure the impact of our drug testing programs, therefore, we evaluated the program according to these criteria. I have statistics from a survey in this area that was conducted just last month. Here are some of the findings I think you'll find very useful and informative for consideration of this ordinance. Number 1, 78% of the participating businesses reported a significant level of increased productivity subsequent to the implementation of our drug testing programs. Number 2, an overwhelming 92% have reduced medical and insurance costs. Number 3, 67% report that absenteeism has been significantly reduced. Number 4, 22% report that employee morale has improved. And 5th, in addition to these above noted facts, accidents on and off the job have decreased by more than 31%. Some may claim that drug testing programs are negative in various respects. I think these statistics support our belief that these programs can be rehabilitative and preventive in nature. These tests can accurately and scientifically detect the presence of illegal drugs and alcohol in the persons being tested. Given the kinds of statistics on drug use among the general population and the findings of the studies conducting train accidents, which Mayor Krug quoted, I don't believe that this city can afford not to implement a drug testing program. The private sector is solidly behind such programs. Why not the public sector? I would also like to point out that the reasons for you to implement a drug testing program far outweigh any disadvantages. The proposal before you would safeguard the workplace, instill public confidence in city employees, improve the quality of services, and make great strides toward ensuring the public safety. I urge you to accept and to adopt the ordinance presented to you today.
Mr. Buckley, thank you so much. I see here that we have a union official who would like to testify. Perhaps we should let Mr. Branzell speak now.
Union leader Branzell challenged the constitutionality of the ordinance on privacy grounds.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to talk upon this issue because I agree with you that it's a very important issue for this city as it is for society at large. But unfortunately, what you're trying to do and what happens in so many cases is that when we have a societal problem, we try to resolve it by trampling on the Constitution. That's exactly what you're doing in this case. The American people have assumed, and I think correctly so, that the right to privacy is an inherent part of the Constitution. And what you are doing is violating that right by this proposed ordinance on random testing. And let me tell you how you're doing that. How do you take these tests? You can take it in one of several ways, I suppose. You can take a blood test, or you can insist on a test which involves body fluids, taking of the urine. And how do you do that under normal circumstances? From what I know, usually someone else has to be present while you're taking that to make sure that it is your blood fluid that is being used. Can you imagine how degrading that process can be for someone who is being asked to do this, and someone from whom you have not even shown a relationship to the reasons for doing it? You've indicated no direct causal relationship. What you individually are saying, we will not do it ourselves, but everyone else in the city is going to have to do it. And why are we doing this? Because some law officer says that the city is corrupt. Does that mean if one of you is corrupt, all of you are corrupt? Does that mean if you find that you think one person in the city is an alcohol abuser, that everyone is an potential alcohol abuser? I think that certainly is a violation of the Constitution. And let's take a look at the results of those tests. I have here a study done by my union. It's a study, or really a survey, of the test results throughout the country of such tests as you're proposing here today. And what do we find? That up to 30% of all those tests are wrong. They're false positive. And in today's paper, as Mr. Pitts has shown, our own paper says 50% are wrong. Now think of it. You take this test, you're degraded, you're dehumanized, and then you find that the chances of it being wrong in the first place is up to 50% in this town. Is this the way we intend to treat our people who are working for you? I don't think it's what the Constitution intended we do.
Mr. Branzell, I just so disagree with what you're saying. I have to interrupt you. I'm flabbergasted by this. You are totally missing the intent of Mayor Krug's ordinance. This is a preventive issue, not a punishment issue. We are saying that if we all stand together and fight against it, come listen to my ordinance later today about the curfew, where we're going to take care of our young people. Let us stand up and prevent problems from occurring. Let us not wait until the train crashes occur. This is ridiculous what you're saying to me, sir.
The one thing, if I can interrupt you, Ms. Simpson, the one thing you cannot do, however, in effort to do what you're suggesting that you're going to do, is trample on the basic rights that the people in this country have fought for hundreds of years.
Mr. Branson.
Yes. No, please come up.
Thank you.
Could you identify yourself,
my name
please?
is Susan Cheek, and I work at the electric power plant down to I-66. And we've had a drug testing program for over 2 years now, and it's been no big problem. I just don't understand these people. They are acting like a public union deserves special treatment. They forgetting that it's our safety that's in our hands. They're driving the school buses. They're driving our city buses. They're putting out the fires. They're going to come when we call them and need them for safety. But they are acting like they're better than we are. And I think that they need to be remembering that they are working for us and looking out after us rather than worrying so much about rights. As a matter of fact, I think they need to be remembering who's paying their salary.
Yes, please come to the microphone. Thank you.
My name is Denise Corbin. I'm the director of the Happy Hearts Daycare Center, and I have never spoken to the City Council before, and quite honestly, I'm quite nervous this evening, but
You're doing wonderfully.
I feel like I must speak out. I certainly understand Mr. Branzell's point of view and his statement. I feel it is necessary for us to trust our employees until there is some evidence that there is a drug problem or a problem of another nature. I would refuse as an employer to submit my employees to the humiliation of the drug testing that has been suggested here.
Yes, please come to the microphone. Thank you.
I am a single parent with 2 children. I don't have a lot of money. I have to take public transportation, and I fear every day for problems. I tell you, it bothers me that these employees that are driving my children and myself may be on drugs. even if they only drink alcohol on weekends. That problem may be in their bloodstream, and if we test them, we will know. Otherwise, it means that their performance may be impaired. It could cost our lives.
Do you want to speak again?
Thank you, Mayor. I beg your indulgence again. I just wanted to follow up with more objective data in support of the last person. There was a study conducted in Stanford University, and very quickly, in a simulated test, licensed private pilots were given an accuracy test the day after they smoked marijuana. The study found that the vast majority were incapable of landing on the targeted point on a runway. That study is the best argument I've ever heard of against the off-time or recreational use of alcohol and drugs. And what I'm advocating is a drug-free work environment and ultimately a drug-free community. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. That's an important fact. Yes, would you please go to the microphone?
I've got one simple question. I want to know why big business and big government is so interested in playing Big Brother instead of educating our people and improving the working conditions. We've got to think about curing the social ills of our society rather than just coming down on them like a bunch of cops. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very strong statement, and I appreciate your making it for us. Yes.
My name is Zeta Haas, and I'm a receptionist in the Department of Streets and Sanitation. So I understand this proposal. I would be tested for drugs along with the police department and bus drivers and everybody else. And I can understand why somebody in my position as an office worker would need to be tested. I'm not responsible for anybody's safety, and I think it's an invasion of my privacy.
Thank you, Mrs. Hawes. Now, at this point, oh yes.
Others also made reference to privacy rights. Although the Supreme Court has upheld the right to privacy in recent years, there is ongoing debate among scholars as to where this right is found in the Constitution.
Not speaking as a doctor, I'm speaking as a citizen of this community. I'm Dick Kleeman, and I suggest that one provision of the ordinance has had very little attention here today, and I would respectfully suggest you ask your city attorney whether the last sentence of the ordinance is not flagrantly unconstitutional and violative of the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination.
Thank you, Dr. Kleeman. In fact, I was just going to call on our attorney, Craig Cornish.
For clarification of the search and seizure issue, the council turned to City Attorney Craig Cornish. He highlighted recent Supreme Court decisions related to drug testing.
We've heard a lot from both sides today about what is and what's not constitutional or unconstitutional with this ordinance. And perhaps I can shed some light on the scope of privacy protections as enunciated by the United States Supreme Court. They held for perhaps the first time that the government may, consistent with the Fourth Amendment, systematically search groups of people not for the purpose of gathering evidence of wrongdoing, but for the purpose of preventing wrongdoing in the first instance. And so they have, therefore, adopted an exception to the Fourth Amendment, which I would refer to as preventive searches. The first case that the Supreme Court decided is Burnley versus Railway Labor Executives Association. This was a set of regulations promulgated by the Federal Railroad Administration, which required private railroad companies to conduct blood testing and urine testing on employees employed by railroad companies who are involved in certain types of accidents, train accidents. The Supreme Court said that while there is some expectation of privacy which is legitimate and should be protected with regard to a person's biochemical secrets, if you will, or biochemical information, they held that the railroad workers have a lower expectation of privacy because they are involved in an industry which is heavily regulated to ensure safety, and that the principal focus of that those regulations is upon the health and safety of the individual railway employees. They also said that one of the reasons they upheld preventive searches, or this preventive search program, was that the government's interest in safety of people involved in rail transportation far surpasses the interest that we have in the individual's right to privacy. And in addition, the opinion, which was written by Justice Kennedy, also stated that employees subject to the test discharge duties which are fraught with such risks of injury to others that even a momentary lapse of attention can have disastrous consequences to our society. I think this opinion fairly well foretells what the court would do, at least with respect to the transit workers in our city and perhaps others. The other decision by the U.S. Supreme Court was the National Treasury Employees Union versus Von Raab. This involved a regulation by the United States Customs Service that required, as a condition of promotion or transfer into positions where a drug interdiction is involved, that the individuals must be tested for drug use by urine. The court again held that the testing in this particular case was permissible under the Fourth Amendment, even though there is no reason to believe that any of the individuals tested have used illegal drugs. And finally, I would like to comment on the Fifth Amendment concern, which was brought up. And under the United States Supreme Court's interpretation of the Fifth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment only protects an individual from being compelled by the government to give testimonial evidence that may be used in a criminal case. And testimonial evidence has been interpreted not to include blood or, for that matter, urine. So I think altogether this ordinance is likely to withstand constitutional challenge, and most of the arguments that I've heard today are not likely to succeed in court, that is, those arguments that oppose the ordinance.
A representative from the National Liberties Union disputed City Attorney Cornish's interpretation of precedent set by the Supreme Court.
I am satisfied that the ordinance that we have drafted is constitutional and will stand constitutional scrutiny. Yes, Mr. Krug, please do come to the microphone. And I have to tell the community, in response to numerous questions, that Mr. Krug is not my husband. He is not my significant other. He's not even my son. In fact, we just met. Please proceed, Mark.
Thank you, Mayor Krug. Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yes, correct. Very good.
I am representing the National Liberties Union today. As most of you know, that's an organization that is a public interest organization dedicated to the preservation of the Bill of Rights. When I listen to Mr. Cornish talk about what I would call exceptions to the Fourth Amendment, it makes me want to step back from this issue for a second and look at other times in our history of this country where we've had emergencies, so-called emergencies, requiring the trashing of the Bill of Rights. For instance, or the Constitution maybe is more accurately. For instance, Abraham Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus because of an emergency. In the 1950s, we fundamentally suspended the Constitution because of the McCarthyism Red Scare. In 1942, due to an emergency, we interned 110,000 Japanese Americans because of an emergency. And as we look back in history, I think we see all three of those times, those were not emergencies. They were perceived at the time in the hysteria of the time. And it troubles me that we're in another emergency, a drug emergency, and we are making exceptions to the Fourth Amendment. There are a number of reasons that we oppose drug testing, and we particularly oppose drug tests when they're random and without individualized suspicion. First of all, as anyone who has read today's paper now knows, the tests are not accurate. There's a more fundamental problem, I believe, with drug testing, and that is, by their very nature, it's a presumption of guilt. It goes very much against the traditional American tradition of due process, in that in this case we are assuming guilt and asking the testee to prove their innocence, quite contrary to our established criminal and civil system. The most important opposition that we have to drug testing comes in the area of privacy. You give someone the ability to look into your bloodstream. You're allowing them to look into other areas of your life that don't deal with illicit drugs. That is, a drug test can identify legal drugs in your bloodstream. drug tests can identify that you have epilepsy or a heart disease by the medications that you're taking for those diseases. The test is also a privacy issue in traditional Fourth Amendment type of arguments, in that in a random drug test, you do not have any individualized suspicion. You do not have a warrant. You do not have a reasonable belief to test someone for this illicit drug. Drug testing, I haven't really heard this come up too much. To do it right, that is to use quality tests versus the lower cost tests, which are very inaccurate. The higher quality tests are going to cost you $100, $200 per person per test. And that's an extraordinary burden, particularly when I believe those of us who are taxpayers are footing the bill. I would much rather, as a taxpayer now, see that money spent on education or any number of programs other than this rather invasive program of fishing through bloodstreams. Thank you.
Mr. Krug. Do you support drug testing programs at all?
No. We do see that in isolated instances, public safety with individualized suspicion after an accident, et cetera, are still privacy invasions. They're not constitutionally, in our opinion, as offensive as a random drug test.
Thank you. Are there any other comments that anyone cares to make? Council members?
I can support the ordinance as it relates to the so-called safety forces, but I cannot support testing the clerical employees. Therefore, I would like to offer an amendment to the proposed ordinance which specifies that only bus drivers, firefighters, and police, not all city employees, be tested.
So you want to limit the testing to bus drivers, firefighters, and the police?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there a second for the proposed amendment?
I will say that if it were up to me, I would vote against the ordinance as a whole, but in the interest of recognizing the realities of the council political strength, I'm going to support that second. I think that's the least we can do.
All right, fine. Are there any comments on the amendment? Council members? Audience? On the amendment, we are now voting to limit the employee safety ordinance only to bus drivers, firefighters, and the police. How do you vote, Mr. Chastain?
I approve.
Mrs.
Yes,
Waters? Ms. Simpson?
Nay.
I approve.
All right, the amendment carries on a vote of 3-1, and now the ordinance, the employee safety ordinance, is now limited to those public employees who are responsible for public safety. I am next going to call a vote on the ordinance. But before I do that, let me just tell you that when I drafted this ordinance, I had 3 issues that I considered and kept in mind. First, is the program legal? Is it accurate? And is it effective? Our attorney has confirmed the constitutionality of the proposal. I personally have great faith that the program will be conducted in a fair and equitable manner. Now, before we vote, are there any final comments from the audience? Thank you. Before I call the council roll, I would like to take an advisory vote from the city residents. After all, that's why you are here. We are here to serve your concerns. And given the fact that this ordinance was drafted by me in response to citizens' expressed concerns, I would like to take a straw vote right now.
Which is more important, the public safety or the Fourth Amendment rights of an individual? Should random drug testing be imposed on Middleburg public employees? How would you vote? For WABA, I'm Robin Robinson. Welcome to the Bill of Rights in Action. I'm Robin Robinson. Today's program is part of WABA TV's continuing series on how the community of Middleburg is responding to contemporary constitutional issues. Should HIV-positive children or kids who already have AIDS be allowed to attend public schools? Our coverage will include a recent Middleburg School Board meeting that addressed this question. The issue was spurred by allegations that an HIV-positive student is enrolled in the Middleburg School District. In response, Middleburg School Board introduced an AIDS policy. The proposal addresses the school system's legal and medical responsibilities regarding students and staff members who have AIDS or are HIV positive. Must our school system uphold equal protection and privacy rights of those infected with the AIDS virus? What about the health concerns of all students and teachers? We now bring you coverage of this emotionally charged meeting where those questions were debated.
Good evening. This is the Middleburg School Board meeting. I welcome all of you. And as many of you know, the first item on our agenda concerns the adoption of an AIDS policy for the Middleburg school system. As you may have heard, there have been allegations that an HIV-positive student is enrolled in one of the schools in our system. Now, I would like to again repeat, for clarification at the outset, that we are not here to discuss rumors or to name names, but to establish a policy, hopefully this evening. We have seen how the failure to come to terms with the reality of AIDS and develop a sound policy concerning this tragic disease have brought great embarrassment to communities such as Kokomo, Indiana, and Arcadia, Florida. I believe that communities across the country, including Middleburg, have learned from these mistakes, and that today we will be able to rise above the fear and emotion to enact a legally sound, medically responsible, and compassionate policy that we can all be proud of. I thank you for indulging me while I've delivered this brief lecture. I'm now going to turn the floor over to our legal counsel, Stephen Nagler, who will discuss the details of our proposed policy.
Your superintendent, Larry Spears, and I have met with school administrators throughout the state and have reviewed numerous HIV, or sometimes referred to as AIDS, policies. I'd like to stress that in drafting this policy, we consulted with medical experts and took into account absolutely the latest medical evidence concerning this disease. Now, as you can see, the policy begins with a discussion of general principles. In summary, these are that barring special circumstances, which I'll outline later, an HIV-positive student or staff member will be entitled to all rights and privileges accorded to the other students or staff members.
The board attorney's explanation of the HIV policy incited protest from a group of parents attending the meeting.
Just wait a minute. Just cut out all that fancy language, Mr. Nagler. I want everyone here to understand exactly what you're saying, what this so-called policy means. This says that students and teachers with a known contagious disease can be in the same classroom with our kids. Now come on, they'll play together, they'll swim together in the pool, they'll be together in the gym, they'll eat. You've seen kids together before. They'll even use the same restroom facilities. Well, I say no to this policy. Never, never. We're not going to open the door and welcome people with a contagious disease into our school. The Middleburg school system belongs to the community, and we'll fight you all the way on this.
There's a more immediate issue. We've already got a sick child here at William Lloyd Garrison High, and we've got to get that kid out. Now, I'm not making any kind of moral judgment here. I don't advocate abandoning that kid, but let's set up home instruction or do whatever you do in cases like this. We want to do right by the child, but we all know kids. They play rough and they get into fights and they get bloody noses. And I've read enough about AIDS to know that that's one way that AIDS can be transmitted. I don't want to be an alarmist, but any parent would share my fears and concerns. What I'm saying is that we have to do something quickly. We can't put all the children at risk.
I would like to call this meeting to order. One last point of information. Anyone who continues to disrupt our meeting this evening will be escorted from this room. The idea, and let me give you another brief lecture, people of Middleburg. We have a democratic form of government where everybody in turn will get their chance to be heard. I would hope that all of you would be tolerant of points of view that disagree with your own point of view as well as those that agree with your point of view. The idea this evening is to discuss both the policy in terms of what it says and its impact in terms of its ramifications. At this point, Dr. Kleeman, would you please present your testimony?
Thank you, Madam President. I shall do so. AIDS, it may surprise you to hear, is not itself a contagious disease. It is a condition. What is contagious and what AIDS results from is the HIV virus. But AIDS itself is not communicated in any of the ways that Mr. Scott briefly referred to in his remarks, through the swimming pool, through toilet seats, through shared utensils. AIDS itself, or rather the disease, the virus itself is communicated only, as best we know, by exchange of bodily fluids. In other words, by sexual intercourse, by contaminated hypodermic needles, occasionally during pregnancy from an infected mother to her fetus, her unborn child. AIDS then is not a disease or a virus. It is not like flu or measles, such as you understand it. It cannot be communicated by simple contact of individuals as they share work and places in the classroom. What AIDS does do, what it results in, is a crippling of the body's immune system. It is possible for people to carry the HIV virus for years without any symptoms whatever. It's believed that thousands, conceivably even hundreds of thousands of people in this country and throughout the world do carry the HIV virus, and it has not been discovered or found by tests, and may never show any outward symptoms. Conceivably, some people of this type carrying the virus could die without ever developing any of the symptoms of AIDS. But the most serious threats that AIDS poses to groups such as this in communities like Middleburg are the twin diseases, if you will, of fear and misinformation. There is so much of both afoot in the land, abroad in the land, that the effects of those diseases, if you will, could be as serious, if not more serious, than that of AIDS itself. The best tool for combating these two factors, fear and misinformation, of course, is education. Now, the question may well be asked, because you'll notice in the policy that the policy suggests only that the superintendent and the patient's or the student's personal physician be informed of the student's condition. And it may well be asked here tonight whether more people than that should not be aware of the student's AIDS condition. I would merely want to say, perhaps anticipating such a question, that medically and legally their confidentiality is far more important than spreading the word about this student or that student. And the fewer people who know it, the better off everyone will be, and the less chance there will be of word leaking out.
At this point, Ms. Payne, one of our parents, has a question.
Thank you. My son has epilepsy, and we had to fight long and hard to get him the kind of understanding treatment he deserved. The teachers and the other students were afraid of him, and they treated him like a leper. The thing is, despite his condition, my son is more alike than different from the other kids. I can't imagine how he would have suffered emotionally and developmentally if he'd been denied the opportunity to attend school and have the chance of a normal, productive life. It took a long time for people to understand the nature of my son's condition, and I have no doubt that it will take a long time for people to put aside their fears about AIDS. I'll admit it, I have my own fears about it. We seem to know so little about this disease. But I do want what's best for all the children of Middleburg. I strongly believe that every child deserves the opportunity to attend school, make friends, and be treated as much like one of his peers as possible. The policy before the board seems to have many sensitive and adequate medical safeguards, and I feel that we should support it. Adopting this policy would, in my view, send a message to our children and indeed the nation that Middleburg can face today's difficult issues with compassion and reason. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. I'd like to ask our counsel at this time, Stephen Nagler, to continue the testimony he started earlier. For after all, there's no way we, nor should we, try to evaluate this policy without also understanding our legal position.
To clarify the policy, the board attorney discussed the constitutional implications of recent litigation involving HIV-infected students.
Everyone here today will remember from your high school civics course that the Bill of Rights protects us all from despised and or feared minorities, from the wrath of the majority. Well, in drafting this AIDS policy, we had those principles very much in mind because of the tremendous fear that most people have of those afflicted with AIDS. There are several other fundamental constitutional principles, specific principles, that guided us in the drafting of this policy. First, the right of privacy that you've already heard a bit about, the underlying tenet that the government shouldn't interfere in people's lives when it doesn't have to and when it serves no important public purpose. The second principle we looked at was the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause, and the whole concept of equal protection. In our country, we believe that there are no second-class citizens, and we're not about to create them in this school district. We've got to act in a rational manner in order to meet standards of due process and fundamental fairness. And these are fundamental principles that our country was founded on, and if we don't adhere to them in our school district, then where then? There's not much law concerning HIV in the public schools. As you all know, this has been an emotionally charged issue. Unfortunately, community opinion is often served as the court of law on this issue, and many communities have declared their fear of this disease as enough to condemn those with AIDS. There have been instances where the identity of an infected child has come to public attention, and the entire family has been shunned by the community. This has been extremely regrettable, and there have even been instances of violence, as we've all read in the newspapers. In some cases, parents of HIV-infected children have agreed to remove their children from the schools in order to avoid a court battle. I'd like to briefly mention just one more statute, and I hate to bring up all the statute law, and that's the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, which underscores, in statutory terms, the constitutional right of privacy. It requires the consent of the student or guardian before that student's record may be disclosed. The Act offers several exceptions, including, for purposes of our discussion, when school officials have a legitimate educational need to know. In Section 3, we have listed these school officials whom we believe have such a need.
Have we consulted our teachers' union on this matter? I would certainly think that a teacher would like to know if they have an AIDS student in their classes.
Perhaps, President Alter, you'd like to call on Larry Spears, superintendent.
Yes. Larry Spears, would you like to speak at this time, please?
Thank you, members of the board. As Mr. Nagler has indicated to you, a great deal of time has been spent in putting this policy together, and part of that time was spent in consulting with the other school districts and with the State Department and also with the teachers union. I cannot tell you that every teacher in our system is comfortable with this policy, but the majority are. There are some teachers who feel that they would like to know if there is an HIV positive tested child in their classroom, but for the most part, and the leadership of the union is committed to the policy of confidentiality and recognizes its importance. As you know from reading the policy applies both to students and to teachers, and that on balance, the union has indicated to us that they support the policy and the principle of confidentiality as it's contained in it.
Thank you very much, Larry. Steve, will you please continue?
I'd just like to mention briefly is District 27 Community School versus Board of Education. District 27 in New York City attempted to bar AIDS-infected children or children who even lived in a household with someone infected with AIDS from their schools. The court upheld the school board's, the city board's position that children with AIDS could not be excluded from public school. In this very interesting case, the court found that excluding children with AIDS without also excluding children with AIDS-related complex or those who are HIV positive, that is children who potentially in the millions, who are asymptomatic but would constitute discrimination under Section 504. The policy before you today is in many ways a statement against such discrimination. It is concerned with the health and respects the rights of every student, staff member in the Middleburg school system. It's rationally based. It's based on the best medical evidence. I believe it's a strong policy that will allow us to provide the best of education for all Middleburg children and avoid future legal battles.
At this time, I'd like to open up any discussion to members of our audience. If any of you have any questions, please feel free to step to the mic.
My name is John Swan. I'm a teacher. I have a question mostly aimed at the doctor. Isn't it true that with the advent of AIDS in our society that all health workers will routinely take steps to protect themselves in every case that comes before them, that is using gloves and otherwise protecting themselves, so that it won't be necessary for people to know in individual cases of, say, the school nurse, which person has AIDS. Is this true?
I think that's very true, and I think the policy as recommended provides for a general education of school staff personnel to prevent spread of any contagious disease, and also means of cleaning up after any possible exposure has resulted. And this can be done, as I indicated earlier in my testimony, as a general thing and not as a specific AIDS, HIV virus-related matter.
Any other questions or comments from anyone in the audience? Yes.
I'm Marianne Wasson. I'm a teacher in the district. I support the policy. I teach high school students who, well, do get in fights now and then, and that's part of my, not daily life, but I would like the bloody nose issue addressed. I do support the policy, but I get an image of little children biting and bloody noses and a child with an open scab and blood getting into it, and I don't want to be an alarmist, but I'd like that addressed. I think it happens. Should the child maybe who is in a fight and is bitten by a child with who is HIV infected, should that child's parents be notified? But what would we do?
Well, I think we go back to what was said just before this, that the treatment of the bloody nose incident should be handled just as any other treatment of a school-developed injury should be. The answer here again is to take all the normal precautions that a school nurse would take.
I think the answer to the question ultimately comes down to using those precautions in every case. And as long as we're cautious in all cases, then we're going to avoid the kind of problem that the question suggests.
At this point, are there any other concerns about our proposed policy regarding AIDS? There being none, I would like to open the floor to an advisory vote by members of the audience. Involved in the issue are rights of privacy, the right to an education for all children, and the right to those who do not have AIDS to also have an education in a safe environment. I think that our school district in Middleburg must show ourselves to be an example to other communities. I will give you three choices: for the proposal, opposed to the proposal, and if any of you choose to abstain, you may do so. All those in favor of the proposal as presented, please raise your hand.
Should HIV-positive children be allowed to attend public schools? Must the school system uphold equal protection and privacy rights of those infected with the AIDS virus? How would you vote? For WABA, I'm Robin Robinson.